First presidential debate will get underway tomorrow night in Cleveland. It is expected to be tense. Those tax findings will likely come up.
No doubt about that. The debate will last some 90 minutes with no handshake because of the pandemic and no opening statements. Joining us now with more on what we can expect and what to watch for tomorrow evening, Washington Post senior editor Mark Fisher. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
I want to start out with the simple, basic stuff. If this were happening right now in any other election year, these two candidates would be exhausted. They would have lost their voices. They'd be making 2, 3, 4 campaign stops a day. Does that make tomorrow night's debate, as well as the others, kind of a do-or-die situation? That's as close to the human touch as they're going to get with voters?
It's a great point, and it's absolutely the case. Of course, President Trump has been holding small rallies at airport tarmacs in a few places, a few battleground states around the country, and he is using these events to say that Joe Biden is not going out and meeting people, and Biden has been making fewer personal appearances. But neither candidate, as you point out, is doing traditional campaigning, and instead this is a very video-driven campaign. So whether it's television ads or online ads, we're seeing really a very different kind of campaign. And what's traditional about this campaign? It's these 3 debates. And so there's more riding on them, perhaps, than in other years. And so we're expecting a very large audience. But as we look at the polls, we see most Americans have their minds made up already. It's that crucial 7 to 11% who are undecided who these debates will really be aimed at.
Mark, let's talk a little bit about that a little bit more. Third party and what you've identified and others as non-voters who have sat out these elections in the past. Anywhere from 3, you just cited 7, to 11% of these folks could be the middle ground in those battleground states. What do those people want to hear from these candidates?
Well, we spent most of last week talking to quite a number of these undecided voters. And some of them, as you say, are actually not really undecided. Some of them are leaning one way or the other, and they just want to see the debate to make sure they're making the right decision. And some of them were people who voted last time for a third-party candidate who have the attitude of pox on all their houses. Neither party is really speaking to me. So there will always be some of those. But there's a good number of people, especially people who consider themselves socially liberal and fiscally conservative, who say that neither party, neither candidate is speaking directly to them. So they want to hear from these candidates specifically, how are they going to address restoring the economy in the face of the virus? How are they going to deal with health care, these kinds of issues? And they're really on the fence. A lot of people on both sides say, how can anyone be undecided after 4 years of Donald Trump, after watching Joe Biden for many years as a vice president and senator? How can anyone not know what they're getting into? Well, the fact is, neither candidate has had the opportunity to go out and campaign in that traditional way. And so people really aren't sure what these guys want to do in the next 4 years.
Mark, let's look at these gentlemen one by one, starting with the president, if we could. The non-politician, that persona that will do it my way or it's the highway. How do you think that has worked for Donald Trump in the past 3.5 years? Are voters who supported him reevaluating that, saying, you know, the pandemic's really my issue and I'm not sure that worked? Or how do you think that he moves forward when that's who he is sort of presented?
So 2 remarkable facts about the Trump presidency. One is that he never really made much of an effort to reach out beyond his base. He's always worked as president, just as he was as a candidate, catering to the people who voted for him. The other curious thing about him is that his popularity has stayed remarkably stable, low, but stable throughout his presidency, no matter what kind of bad publicity or big achievements he's had. There's just no change, really. And so we're not sure what that will mean for the November election, but we do know that both parties see this as a turnout election. If they can get their base excited, enthusiastic, and get a higher turnout than they did last time, they think they'll win. But all bets are off when you use the usual political markers to determine how Donald Trump is going to do. And we should also note that polling, although Joe Biden is significantly ahead in the polls, we saw last time that there were some states where the polls weren't quite showing exactly the way things turned out. Many other states where they were. So it's not clear which way people are headed.
And that's why they have the election, right, Mark? Appreciate you so much for your time. Look forward to your insight in the days and weeks ahead.
Thank you.
You can watch the entire debate live right here on WGN. It starts tomorrow at 8 p.m. local time. WGN's political reporter Tamon Bradley will be there live for WGN. Paul Lisnick will host a debate pre-show on WGNTV.com.